Oh, Ian, I'm so sorry, mate. Someone's banging on my door. Someone really wants to. I'm really sorry, mate. Sorry, mate. Sorry, give me 2 seconds. I'm so sorry, Ian.
You just know I'm leaving that in as a blooper, don't you?
Well, you can leave this in as well. My bloody girlfriend, I swear to you, there's a DPD driver in this area, and he honestly says, like, we feel like brothers. Like, he says, I don't visit anyone more than I visit you. If Brexit's bad and my girlfriend stops shopping on Amazon, like, we're all screwed. That's it. The economy just crashes.
Welcome to the Industry Angel Podcast. We hear from the best business minds across the globe. Entrepreneurs, social influencers, marketing mavens, and sales rock stars. We've got them all. Here comes your weekly dose of inspiration with your host, Ian Farah.
Welcome to episode 103 of the Industry Angel. Thanks for all the kind messages I received about the Great North Run. We had an amazing day running for an outstanding charity, and it was great to see the streets lined with well-wishers and volunteers. There's so much money raised on the day too. It's a pretty special one. One of our listeners, photographer Simon Lowe, snapped me on 9 miles, and it's not something you want to see. Thanks, Simon. It was a warm one. I was shattered. It wasn't really the best running conditions. So well done to everybody listening who took part, volunteered, worked, and supported the runners and charities. You've made a difference. So well done. We'll do some shout outs in the next episode or so, and we'll dive straight into hearing from today's guest. Today we have a keynote and motivational speaker on risk-taking and decision-making. Welcome to the Industry Angel, Caspar Berry.
Hello.
Is that it? Just hello.
That's it. Hello.
Right. Now, Caspar, you're a podcast. I was expecting you to be like, hey, it's great to be here and be all Americanized and all wacky and wild. And you're just taking this.
I'm so bad
London,
at that stuff.
This London
I'm a motivational speaker, and I'm still bad at it. Hello.
But you're not actually a London gentleman, are you? Because you're from up my neck of the woods.
That's right. I am. I'll slip into it. Honestly, when you start talking about that, I will slip into Geordie without really being aware I'm doing it at all.
Yeah. Well, listen, it is good to have you with us. And because you were suggested by an Industry Angel listener, okay, no pressure, but I take these suggestions very seriously. Well, I mean, because like as a podcaster, you get a crazy amount of emails from, people wanting to be on your show, from speaker agencies. But if a listener suggests someone, Cass, right, you sneak your way up the queue.
Have I jumped a queue to that? I didn't know that.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Listen, there's no pressure here, but I'm expecting big things. And
I mean, it feels like pressure, and I'll be honest, that's how it feels.
Well, I've been on CasparBerry.com, right? Amazing. Yes. Watched a few of your videos, checked out your LinkedIn profile, and I thought, he's the man. He's the man for Industry Angel. He's going to make this the best episode ever.
The best, the 103rd and best.
No pressure, is there?
No.
So, while I was doing my research, my head became a bit fuzzy, right? Because you've just crammed so much into your years. You've just mentioned to me offline there about being on Biker Grove, so TV and film, poker and Vegas, So where do we start here? So I'm going to ask you to fill in the gaps.
Okay.
Cool.
Where shall we start?
You tell me.
Well, should we start with Biker Grove? I mean, if we're going to go right back, that's kind of the beginning, really, because it's a funny thing. Biker Grove, in some ways, took my life in a direction which I think it shouldn't have gone in, but it did. So I think Biker Grove was the beginning of my working life. I mean, literally all I'd had before that was a paper round. And I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to be before then, by the way, which was a record producer. And it was like, it was a passion. I used to go down into my cellar and I used to mess around with Steinberg Pro 24, which became Cubase for anyone who's into that. And then I did this thing called Biker Grove, and it just took my life in a totally different direction. I got into television, and the way that I say this sounds very pretentious, but it was like, honestly, the finger of God came down on the first day of the first take and pointed at the director behind the camera and said, that's what you want to do with your life. And the next 10 years of my life was dedicated to that.
Wow. So like, what did you not like about the acting bit then?
So acting is, in fact, I wish I'd stayed an actor because it was much easier. Acting, you just have to go where you're told and say your lines. Do you know what I mean? Michael Caine, just say your lines, don't bump into the furniture, or Roger Moore. And directing was where all the power was, and I was quite a precocious little 16-year-old, I suppose. I wanted to shape it and create it. And actually, I know this sounds really weird. I was aware that it was weird at the time, but I honestly thought I'd be good at it. I was 16. I honestly thought I'd be good at it, and within 4 years, I'd won the Royal Television Society Award for Best Broadcast Drama that year, beating Biker Grove. I was good at it, but I didn't know how I knew that because I'd never been into an editing room. Do you know what I mean? I didn't know what lighting was or anything like that. I just felt that it would bring together all the things that at that point in my life I was passionate about. The problem, because I started off this by saying that it took me in the wrong direction, the problem is that the film industry is horrible. I mean, like really horrible. And television. It's a place where you go to sell your soul, because artistic creation, which is what anything half decent is, it's very hard to mix that with, commerciality and money and all the rest of it. And don't get me wrong, millions of people do it every day. It can be done, but I hated it personally. And so it was 10 years of my life that, I made 2 feature films and several television programs. It wasn't that I didn't have some success, but it sort of took me away from, I think, what I should have been doing in my life, really.
So that's a nice little segue in the next bit then. So what did you think you should have been doing with your life then, Cass?
Well, what I think now is I know why the film industry was the thing that I thought I should be doing, because what I wanted to do deep down, what I do now, and what I guess even, record producing would have been, is I wanted to create things for people that gave them pleasure, right? And obviously, when you're making a film, you're doing that. What I'm doing now as a speaker is I get to do that. I get to create a little one-man play, which hopefully is funny and enjoyable, and a pleasure to sit through in and of itself. But it's also hopefully edifying and a bit educational, and helping people, take a direction in their lives. And the great thing about speaking, as I always put it, is when you're making films, it constantly felt like what I wanted and what the money men wanted were different. I didn't think they were, by the way. It wasn't like I wanted to make, 3 Colors Red or something obscure. My favorite film was E.T., do you know what I mean? Which I think had a bit of commercial success. But when you're speaking, what I want to do and what my client wants to do are exactly the same. They are, to come in, give this audience some laughs and some edification, and send them out of the room slightly different people. And I love that. I love being completely in harmony with what the market wants.
Yeah, I like that, sending them out of the room slightly different people, because you've kind of got the power. And I guess when clients come to you and say, Cass, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, if that's not for you, then you just walk away and you go to the next.
Yeah, line. I do. I really do. Yeah, I tell them that I'm not the right speaker. Yeah. Unfortunately, that happens quite rarely for me for a very specific reason, which is that most of my work come through third parties called speaker bureaus.
Yeah.
And a speaker bureau's job is to have a good, market knowledge of a good 3,000 speakers. So broadly speaking, when I've been recommended, it's by good people who've heard the brief and think Caspar's the right person for you.
Yeah.
So it very rarely happens that I'm the wrong person then, but it'll happen. I don't know. 5%, 10% of jobs that come to you directly, and at some point you have to go, I just don't think I'm the one for you.
Yeah. So what happened there was you jumped right to the speaking bit, and I'm interested in the
bit in between.
Yeah, I mean, what's this poker player?
So, well, it is all about the Biker Grove. It all fits. It all fits in like we planned it. Because what happens is I spend 10 years working in the film industry, and honestly, we can go into details if you want, but basically I just, I make film. I go to Cambridge to do the footlights and work with talented people there, but all the time I'm writing films. I have my first film produced by Film 4 before I graduate. In fact, I'm doing rewrites during my finals. And then Columbia TriStar, and then I work for Miramax and Disney and all of this kind of things. Great, fantastic. And but I get to about 23, 24, and then by the age of 25, I just hate it. And I've actually just stopped working. I mean, I've stopped.
Right.
My agent's on the phone going, "Are you all right?" And because you're not really doing anything. And I was running down my savings, and I got to 25, going in 26, and just thought, I just want to do something else. And I don't know what that is, because I've spent the last 10 years of my life just very focused on this one thing. And I finally have to come to this place where I admit that it's not what I want to do with my life. I've never, ever had a happy professional experience. Loved directing the plays at university. I loved making my short films, but I've never had a happy professional experience. So that's a bit of a crisis. And it coincided with a trip to Las Vegas in the summer of 1999. I used to go to Las Vegas every sort of 6 to 12 months with a buddy of mine. We used to play blackjack and roulette. We were gambling. We were just buying fun, great fun, drinking all the free White Russians. And then on this particular trip, he ventured into the poker room. He went before me and he came back and he said, "This is brilliant. This is," and by the way, when I say came back, he came back to the room because I was in bed with alcohol poisoning. That's literally how I became a professional poker player. Was I got alcohol poisoning. He had no one to go and play blackjack with. So he went into the poker room.
I was really nervous there because you started that sentence with, and I was in bed with, and I'm like, oh my God, where's this going?
No, don't worry, alcohol poisoning. It's not a her or a he or anyone.
Or a tiger.
Or a tiger. And so I went down when I was better, which took 3 days, by the way. Went down.
Damn those White Russians.
And do you know what? It was still the best holiday of my life. That's how good it was, even though 3 days I was spent in bed. And I went down to the poker room and I just immediately thought, it wasn't quite as profound as that moment on the set of Biker Grove, but I immediately thought, God, this is gripping. This is before, this is very important. This was before that poker boom. Okay. So the poker boom happens in about 2005 when the collision of online poker and televised poker, bring it about. So this was 1999. And so poker, you didn't really know about poker. I played it around the kitchen table with my dad. That's a 5-card draw, so this was a different kind of poker. But 7-card stud, by the way, at the time. And I just thought, God, this is just amazing. And I was on the plane on the way home, and I said to him, like, that's what I want to do. And he said, "You're crazy." And I said, no, not forever, but for like 6 months, a year, it's something I can do. Maybe I'll meet some interesting people, encounter some interesting stories, that kind of thing. And he said, "Okay, do it." So I went back, I read 30 books about poker. And then on January the 5th, I think it was 2000, I went out to be a professional poker player.
On January the 5th, so just after Christmas, yeah?
Yes. So yeah, exactly. January 2005, like new year, new start. No, sorry. January 2000, like literally, after the millennium.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you went there, what, with a bit savings in your back pocket? And did you have somewhere to stay or what?
Yes, so good question. So I had about 50, like, what's your bankroll? It's quite a subjective question. I had £50,000 of savings. Okay. I didn't want to burn through that all playing poker. But obviously the aim of playing poker is to make a profit. You've got to have some money to sustain you through the swings, through the variance, the ups and downs. But that's how much I had. And then I stayed initially for about the first 6 months or so. I stayed in hotels down the cheap end of the strip, most of which are knocked down now. So Circus, Riviera, the Sands, and the Stardust. And they used to give you what's called a poker player's room rate if you played for a certain amount of time. And so the funny thing about it was everyone thought, oh, that's heavenly, going to play professional poker. That's really like, life of independent, carefree freedom. Yeah. And actually I had to punch in and out. It's the only job I've ever done in my life when I literally had to punch in and out to prove that I'd done the hours. And then after 6 months, I started playing in bigger games than those hotels would offer. And so I moved into a place called Budget Suites, which was behind the Stardust, which was like a condo that you rented by the week. And that's now been knocked down along with the Stardust, sadly. But that's where I was for the next 2 and a bit years.
So the higher your stakes, the higher your roll, the better the accommodation?
It was quite nice accommodation. Do you know what? I really like Budget Suites. When I've told people since then that I stayed in Budget Suites, like taxi drivers and things go, Jesus, man, that's a lot of drug dealers there. And I was like, really? I was never aware of it. It had a nice little swimming pool, a laundry. Yeah. It had everything that I wanted and needed. I really wasn't aware that I was in any
ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. But I'm quite sensitive about things like that. I would have thought if someone had been walking around looking like they were in Breaking Bad, I'd have been fairly aware of it, but I obviously wasn't. So, no, I was very happy there. It was a really lovely place to stay.
And you did 3 years, did you? Or?
So the whole experience was about 3 years. From that summer of 99, it was to the summer of 2002. But I was actually in Las Vegas, for 2.5 of it.
Yeah. Now, you know what everyone's thinking, Cass, don't you?
Did you make a profit?
Yeah. Come on.
And the funny thing is, when people ask that question, there's always they ask that question with one of two expectations.
Okay.
Right? They think half the people ask the question thinking, "Oh, he's a degenerate. He's broke," and the other half of the people think, especially if I'm doing speaking now, they think, "Oh, he made millions. He doesn't have to work anymore." And the Gaussian bell curve will tell you that most people lie between any two extremes. And I did, and like most professional poker players, I was making, if you average it out over the 3 years, I made about $70,000 a year, and that's much less in the first, much more in the third, because you get better, right? And you. But the other interesting thing about that question is, I completely understand why people ask it. I'd be exactly the same, but it's not magic making money at a poker table. So the first thing to explain with this, Ian, is you're not playing against the house when you play poker. All right. So it's fundamentally different in kind to roulette and blackjack. Those games, you can make a bit of money at blackjack if you card count and things, but basically most of the games in the casino, they're set up in such a way you're going to make a loss, right? And that's completely fair because they've got a lot of real estate to pay for and a lot of things to facilitate you enjoying those games, right? So you're buying fun. But when you play poker, you're playing the other players around the table. So you're never going to be banned from a casino for making $1 million because you don't have to cheat. You're not winning it from the house. You're winning it from the other players around the table.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, so how do you win money from them? You just be better at poker. Now, that's the simplest and the most difficult thing in the world. But how do you do that? You just, you read more books, you get more knowledge, you execute better in the moment. That's how you do it. And in the long run, you will make a profit at poker. It's just like anything else.
So it obviously sustained you for a few years, and then what made you come back then? What kind of called it a day?
So, do you know what? I was just talking about this with someone yesterday, and it's really interesting. So I think whenever someone asks that question, I always say there's three answers to it, right? The first answer is like a really long, boring answer of what I was thinking at the time, and I can't really remember it, right? The second answer is I just did. Like, why does anyone do anything? Because at some point you just decided. And the third answer is me trying to sum that up in a crafted way. And there were three main reasons. Number one, it had got boring. If you can imagine going to the same table in the Mirage Hotel Casino like every day, 6 days a week, for 3 years, it had got boring. Number two, although the money I was making was decent and it was tax free, it wasn't for me. It wasn't. I wasn't going to be world champion. I didn't think I was going to fulfill my earning potential doing this. There was definitely a plateau, which I was quite soon hitting. And number three, I split up with my girlfriend. And so decided to leave town. But do you know what? I was talking about this with someone yesterday, and they said to me, we were talking about turning landmark ages, like when you turn 50, you turn 40, or you turn 21, or whatever it is. And I agreed with them that turning 40 was actually quite cool and I enjoyed it, and turning 30 was difficult. And actually the most difficult age of all for me was turning 29. And it occurred to me, I've never put these two together. I turned 29, obviously, when I was playing poker. And I think I had that kind of little life crisis, like, what am I going to do this for the rest of my life? I'm knocking on 30 and I don't know what I want to do with my life, because it's not this as much fun as this is, and it had been fun for a good period of it. So yeah, that's all those things together.
It's funny, it's coming back to me that that W.C. Fields quote's coming back to my head about, what did he say? He said he spent half his money on gambling, alcohol, and wild women, and the other half he wasted.
Well, but although I don't mean to undercut the joke, but the funny thing is, you have to understand, the years I played poker, they were the most disciplining and difficult of my whole life.
Okay.
Like, you don't play drunk, and I personally wasn't partying. In fact, I went for a stag do to Las Vegas in 2011, which was many years afterwards. And I had been before. I had gone, obviously, and got drunk and things. But I went on this stag do, and one of us nearly died of alcohol poisoning and just general drinking. And I remember thinking, this is the Vegas that everyone's speaking about when they go like, how did you manage to spend 3 years there? Because those 3 years, I was quite abstinent. I very rarely drank. I'm not saying never, but I very rarely drank. It was like when you're playing poker, if you're not playing your A game, you're losing money. So you've always got to be in the zone, So yeah, almost, this is the way that I phrase it. And it is honestly true, although it sounds trite. Almost everything that someone who hasn't played poker and been in the world properly thinks they know about poker, almost everything is not true.
Right. So thinking about that kind of poker bit then, and now you're a speaker around risk taking and decision making, that sort of thing.
Yes.
you link this back to poker in your talks?
Yes, all the time.
Okay.
I don't tell stories about what happened to me when I was playing poker, but the way my speech is phrased is, this is what I learned when I was playing poker, and this is what actually is what took me through the experience of setting up and running and then selling a video production company based in Newcastle, which is where I met Derek, who's the listener who kindly recommended me for this. And then it's what I've been taking around the world for 15 years to great companies and sharing with them. Because actually what you learn when you play poker is that a lot of the way that we make decisions is natural, it's intuitive, but it's actually quite inefficient. It's actually quite bad. And if you were to play poker like that, then you would make a loss because it's too risk averse, it's too safe. You're not embracing the realities of uncertainty enough. It keeps you alive. It's how our species has prospered, but it's not good if you want to run a profit maximizing organization. And so what I present is actually quite counterintuitive. But here's the interesting thing, Ian. It's the maths that you learn on page 2 of any half decent poker book is the mechanics of risk and reward analysis, which forms the basis of decision-making science, which is about all resource allocation. And if you do an MBA, you have to endure this stuff because it's actually quite heavy. But it's completely counterintuitive. It is not how most people make decisions. And so, some people find what I say on a stage some people think it's wrong. Some people think it's illogical. Some people think it's too challenging. But I don't say anything that actually isn't there in academia,
So is there a link there then? So are we saying there the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward?
So it's basically that what we're trying to do most of the time in business and life is we're trying to do the thing most likely to succeed. Okay, we have something called judgment, and what judgment has basically been reduced to is pick the thing most likely to succeed. So this person has good judgment. They knew that Trump was going to win. He was more likely to succeed. This person has good judgment. They picked a really good candidate here. So we're always trying to do the thing most likely to succeed. And that's perfectly natural because we don't want to fail. We're hardwired not to want to fail. And by the way, that's a good thing. There's nothing about what I'm saying that thinks that doesn't ultimately protect us and stop us from doing stupid, crazy, dangerous things. Okay. But the thing most likely to succeed in a competitive capitalist economy is not necessarily the thing that's going to give you the greatest returns on investment for lots of reasons, but one very simple one, which is if it's the thing most likely to succeed and everybody knows it's the thing most likely to succeed, then everyone's doing it. And by the time that everyone's doing it, the returns on those investments become smaller. Simple example, in the last 10 years, we've seen it happen with Google. If you started advertising on Google in 2004, you got massive returns on investment because people didn't really understand it. People didn't necessarily trust it. Not everyone was doing it. And so the price compared to the return was much smaller. Try advertising on Google now. Prices are much higher because everyone's doing it. It's recognized. It's the thing most likely to succeed. Good, fantastic, great. It's safe, but your returns on those investments are smaller. And so you're better off on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. Well, actually not LinkedIn, but you're better off doing investment on certain platforms which people don't necessarily understand as much. It represents a greater risk. It's going to take longer for you to get to grips with that. There are fewer manuals, fewer forum posts. The more like Wild Wild West something is, actually potentially, not necessarily actually, but potentially the greater returns there are.
Okay.
And if you extend that metaphor out, it applies to almost everything in life.
It's interesting, like business, for instance, I often talk about, the importance of surrounding yourself with people who can stretch you, inspire you, and motivate you, that sort of thing. But I think, interestingly, risks comes into this because maybe our listeners might have shared an idea with friends or family and colleagues, and they don't have the same appetite for risk, maybe around the boardroom, and then it just crushes your inspiration, doesn't it? So how do you get your peers on board with your appetite for risk and your ideas?
So, I mean, first of all, I think you're totally right about that. Like, so let's say when you've got an idea and you share it with someone, there's two responses that person comes back with so often. Like 96% of your friends are going to say one of two things with that, and both of them crush you, right? One of them is, everyone does that. Okay, so that crushes you. All right, everyone's doing it. That's kind of like what I'm saying. Now, everyone's doing that. You're not going to get great returns, right? And the second one is, well, no one's doing that. So, I mean, why would anyone want that? If anyone wanted that, then someone would be doing it right now, right? And that's like a brilliant joke. Now, when I say brilliant joke, it's an economist joke. So there are no brilliant joke that economists tell. But as a joke that economists tell, it's a very funny joke, which is this. Two economists walking down the road, right? And one economist looks at the floor and he says, "Oh, is that a £50 note?" And the second economist says, "No, it can't be a £50 note, because if it was, someone would have picked it up by now."
Right, okay.
Right? Which is just about that. Exactly what we've just been saying there, right? Well, the point about the joke is it's a really good analogy, because at some point there will be a £50 note on the ground that no one's picked up. Okay, so are you going to be the person that picks it up, or are you going to be the person that assumes that no, it can't be because someone would have picked it up by now? So, and that is actually about this concept of likelihood, of probability, is that there are things out there which everyone thinks are very unlikely to work, but which you might think are very likely to work because you know something that other people don't. Have a think about Dragon's Den. In many ways, Dragon's Den is a probability convincing competition, right? What you do is you go in there with an idea and you're trying to drag the dragon's perception of the likelihood of success of this thing up to your passionate 110%, because that's where the person who's pitching it is, right? And so that's what actually, by the way, all sales in many ways is this probability convincing competition. You're trying to get someone's perception of the probability of likelihood of the success of this thing up to 110%, because then they'll buy. So that's this probability concept. But without going into too much detail of graphs and equations, which obviously we don't want to do today, but there's another element to this, which is that the appreciation that everywhere in life there are examples of people, very often the most successful people, companies, organizations, who do things which sometimes fail more often than people who are much less successful, but by failing more often, they actually succeed. So I'll give you my classic and favorite example, and you've probably heard it before, but it's just because it's so stark, is Babe Ruth, the baseball player, retires at the end of his career with the all-time record for the most number of home runs hit, right? So he's the best player of his generation. He also retired with the all-time record for the most number of strikeouts. Complete misses of the ball. So by two different metrics, he is both the best and the worst player of his generation. But that's because if you want to hit a home run, you have to pull your bat back harder and swing faster. And you actually give yourself a lower chance of hitting the ball at all. But when you hit it, you're going to hit a home run. And that sort of cuts to the heart of what essentially I teach, which is that we should be trying to hit more home runs, but accept that in doing that, we're going to strike out more often. That's just a law of the universe. And no one wants to strike out. We all hate it. If you remember, Wayne Rooney has been through several periods of his career where he hasn't scored a goal for six matches or something, and the press come down on him like a ton of bricks, as they did with Babe Ruth. But the only way that you're going to achieve brilliance, Kevin Peterson, another one to take these sporting analogies, is by being prepared to swing at the ball and miss it. And there are, Google AdWords in the early days was an example of that. You might not have got to grips with it at the first time you put an ad out there. But if you're prepared to push through that period of striking out, you get to the place where you could hit home runs.
That's interesting. So for me, that's like making an informed decision. So you know that if you're going to swing that bat, there's an element of risk because you could miss, but you could hit a home run. So therefore, It's a safety thing. If you're kind of informed of the decision and you know the outcomes, pros and cons, then it's easier to make it. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, but keep going because I know what you're going to say, and it's a really important point. Go on. You're going to say there's another form of failure, isn't there, where you don't know what the outcome's going to be? Yes, am I right? Is that
well? I guess someone like Babe would have got so far down the line that he knew the outcomes, because it's an informed decision. And what I'm thinking from a kind of control freak of me being, I like to do a lot of research. I like to understand what the pros and cons are. But yes, I get what you're leading to then is sometimes you might think, the cons are this, this, and this, but actually they become that, and that, and you hadn't thought about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's one type. That's one type. I think you might be, or I thought you might be going on to say there's another type of risk taking, which is where you don't know. So Babe Ruth has got this strategy where, I know if I swing the bat harder and faster, I will miss it, and that's fine. I can reconcile that. I can rationalize that. But what if you were trying to launch a new product or something? You have no information. You have no idea what it's going to be. And here's the interesting thing, right? Now we're going to get a little bit technical now, but it's a really good question, and it deserves a really good answer. And there's no sidestepping this technicality. Probability measures two completely different things. Okay, as a language, and all it is a language. It measures two completely different things. It measures frequency, and it measures certainty. Right, now here's what I mean by that. You can say either there is a 50% chance of rain tomorrow, which means when I make that statement on 50% of occasions, it's going to be true. Okay, or you can say I am 50% sure that there's going to be rain tomorrow, which means I'm not entirely sure. I don't have all the information, so I'm 50% sure. And both of those things are stated by probability. Now, it seems irrelevant at the moment to the point you're making, but trust me, I'm going to bring it around. When Babe Ruth swings at the ball, he can say 20% of the time I'm going to hit a home run or whatever it was. I don't know, 3%. Okay, it's not a question of certainty. It's about saying the frequency. I'm going to hit harder and faster, and I'm going to get more often at the time, more likely I'm going to strike out. Less often I'm going to hit the ball at all, but this often I'm going to hit a home run. By the way, Babe Ruth wouldn't have done this. He was just a big man who had a talent for doing that, right? But you could do that if you're in Babe Ruth's situation. But then the other situation is, I don't know. I'm just less sure. And therefore, it's still the same language that we have. It's still a lower probability. Now, my classic example of this actually comes from sales, Ian, which I know is what you speak about, right? Let's say you're a salesperson and you've got these, and you're dealing with the leads that you have at the moment. There's two different kinds of leads that you could have. Either someone could give you these leads and they say, like, these are richer people, right? They're not going to buy from you as often. So these are going to be more difficult to convert. But when you convert them, you're going to get more money because they're richer people. And you go, okay, cool. I can buy into that. You still might have difficulty, by the way. You still might go, geez, I hate this part. I hate this set of leads because, at least these ones, I make a sale a day. These ones, I sometimes go a whole week without a sale and I look bad and I don't like that and I feel bad and I get demotivated. So that's the first problem with that. But then there's this third pile of leads where someone goes, okay, so here's your second option. We don't know. We don't know how good they are. We don't know anything about these people. So now it's not just that you're less likely to convert, it's that you're just less sure. But here's the interesting thing about that pile. They might be brilliant. Do you know what I mean? You just don't know. No, they're not bringing to you saying they're no good. They're useless people. They're useless leads. We just don't know. We just don't have any data on them. And so what a lot of people do in that situation is they go, okay, well, I don't know. I'm like 10% sure. Have very little information, and so that represents a risk. So I'm not going to do it. And that's not necessarily the case. Now you do want to know information. You want to try and research them. But what I would do is just start phoning those people up, because you're going to get information. And again, think about the Wild West. Think about the Google example. It may be that this is a brilliant set of leads, and that the person who is prepared to allocate some time to exploring that is the person that's going to get the benefit and the yield from that. And a lot of the time in life, we won't call those leads up, because it means reallocating resources from what we're doing at the moment, which is not brilliant, but it's okay, to doing something which is less certain. It's less sure. And that's different to this middle pile of leads where it's actually, we know it's harder to convert them, but when they convert, they buy more. So those are the two different kinds of risk which you're identifying there. Things where we know it's going to be harder, to things where we don't know anything at all. And what I would say is we need to push more into both of those spaces, as difficult as they are, because those are where opportunity lies.
It's really interesting, especially the sales analogy, because you're dead right. What I would do is maybe have 3 pots like that. And you might split it up into thirds, and we'll do a third of our time on the stuff we kind of know we're going to win, but it's a lesser return, and the middle bit is kind of middle risky. We'll see, but then quite often people don't like filling tenders in because they think, we haven't got a chance. Someone else is going to win it. It's going to take us a week to then fill it in. Let's not do that. So then you think, well, no, you've got to make the risk, because someone's got to win it, and just put the time and effort, and you never know. So it's a really good analogy you make on sales.
And I think so. It's a similar sort of thing. Like what we've got at the moment is, so we've got Google AdWords, we've got a certain return with that, and then we've got LinkedIn, which costs more. But when I get a bite with LinkedIn, it could lead to a huge 5 figure contract because those people are going to buy more than someone who's just searching for one speaker. And then right now we've got, a whole load of things. We've got Instagram TV, which is just starting up. We've got YouTube pre-rolls, which most speakers haven't invested in. A lot of people trying to sell you, get rich quick schemes, doing that kind of thing. So then we've got this whole sector over here, which I haven't explored. I don't know any other speakers that have any data on that. And that's like pile number 3, and my whole philosophy is, again, that people aren't exploring those spaces often enough. And you can do calculations to show that there are, if we take the whole basket of all of those things, look, if we thought it was rubbish and useless, then don't do it. I'm not saying try everything. But what I'm saying is, where you feel for good reasons that there might be some upsides in some of these opportunities, but not every time we get that, then these are things worth exploring. But this is the difficult aspect of it. We can all do that. We can all say that. We can all accept that. But at the moment, every single hour of your time is spent doing something, and every single pound of your money is invested in something, even if it's sitting in a current account. And so here's the difficult thing about risk taking. It's essentially resource allocation. But because every unit of your resources are currently being allocated, all resource allocation is actually reallocation. Right. And therefore, for something new to start, something old must stop. So when you've got these 3 piles, it's not the appreciation that pile 2 and 3 may offer opportunities. That's easy. The difficult thing is stopping phoning people in pile number 1, because pile number 1 works. And every hour that you stop doing that is a risk. That's the challenge. It's the movement of doing from something that works to something that might not.
Yeah, I've been there around the board table when we've tried to internationalize and break into other countries, and it's like, let's just stay here. We kind of know it's nice, and it's like, I know, but the goals in them are hills, let's go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, by the way, sorry, Ian, the final point about this is that's the essence of, that's why some sort of calculation does come into it. And again, I won't do that calculation here. It's really, really boring. But that's what you're doing as a poker player, is you're constantly calculating. You might win this hand, you might lose this hand, but there's a function that's created from the amount of money that's in the pot. That's the upside. The amount of money that was required from you, your investment, that's the downside, the cost of the call. And some function of those two, and the likelihood of the probability, that's the calculated risk that determines whether this is a long-term profitable opportunity or a long-term loss-making opportunity.
I guess it still comes back to you inside, though, like your appetite for risk. Can you handle losing that money? Can you handle that failure? Yes. For your investment, if you might do the 80-20 rule. Let's put 80 in some safe investments, but have you got the steel to put 20% of your investments in something that's really risky, but the return's going to be great? It's just like, it comes down to your appetite, though, your bottle, I guess.
Yes. Yes, to a certain extent, but you're right. I think in that moment it comes down to bottle, but I'm a very risk averse person, right? Honestly, genuinely, very, very risk averse. What happens is, if you stand back and you look at this logically enough, right, what you realize is you have to take when I say logical, actually, what I mean is long-term. When you take a long-term perspective of this, what you realize is, in the long term, if you don't take this risk, you are sabotaging yourself. Okay. Now, my point is, if the downside is someone could get killed, like if you're in food preparation, obviously don't do that, right? If the downside is like, you're going to lose your job, then obviously don't do that. But if the downside is we're going to lose some money on this, I'm going to lose some time on this. I might even lose some reputation on this. That's a real bummer. But if you can see that is the potential downside, but that if you don't do it, you are actually losing a lot more money on the altar of the fact that this thing might fail, this particular thing might fail. Actually, it's logic that moves you into the new space. It's not bottle. It's like, well, if we don't do it, we're actually turning down money. That's what
and it's funny because I think what you've alluded to there is, if you don't make them risks, you could go down, you could risk everything. It's a bit like, I don't know, I'm sure there's a point where somebody said, should we go and buy 50,000 typewriters and sell them, where actually a year later they were defunct, and it's, if we actually don't move with the times, we're going to risk everything. So sometimes it's a no-brainer, but I'm really still going back to that, getting around the board table and getting people on board with you. How do you get them to not convince them, because that's getting into sort of sales and manipulation, but how can you get them back on your page? Is it just telling them facts and trying to inform them a bit more?
So I think the first thing is what you just alluded to there is the kind of the burning platform argument, which is there's a JFK quotation. I think that the long term risks and costs of action are not as great as the long term risks and costs of inaction.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a point of time. So then by the way, the direct answer to your question is one of the phrases that I teach people is, instead of saying all risks and decisions are like, if I do this versus if I don't do this.
Yeah.
If we do this, then that's difficult. All these things might happen. Whereas if you don't do this, it's cool. We're doing what we're doing, and what we're doing works, right? That's a really easy question to answer. Most of the time, you won't do it, right? Now flip it. Go versus what if we do this versus what if we never do this? Now never, right? Like, for example, I won't tell you who, but a big supermarket was talking about replacing its fleet of vans, right? And people were saying, they're under real pressure. They're really not great vans. And as soon as they started talking about what if we never do this, what if we never replace these vans? And then the other side go, well, of course we'll replace them at some point. And you go, okay, cool. So
Nice.
then the question is when. And it might not be now, but at least now we've got this on the agenda and the table. So that's one point. But my second point is, you're absolutely right to talk about the boardroom table. It's an obsession with mine as well. And my dream is that a boardroom can start to have a conversation genuinely around something which they could try having a 30% likelihood of success.
Okay.
Because the world in which we live at the moment, the majority of boardrooms, somebody would actually go, 30%, it sounds like you're planning to fail, right? Mm-hmm. No. Everything has a likelihood of success, because everything that we can do, we cannot control every single variable. Okay? So what I teach people is to appreciate this calculation. It involves taking on board this new skill, this new understanding. But if everyone around the boardroom table does have that new skill and understanding, they start to become more in control of their decision making, their resource allocation, because it becomes less about bottle and more about actual intention. And when you have a group of people in a room who have that new skill and ability and way of looking at things, they can make completely different decisions. Because if 1 in 3 of the things that you do, right, if everything has a 30% chance of success, if 1 of 3 of the things that you do yields 100 times what you invested in it, that means 1 in 3 times you get 100 to 1 on your investment. And that is phenomenally profitable. And if you don't do it because there's a 60-70% chance that you could fail, you are literally leaving so much money on the table. It's not true.
I'm in. Where do I sign? Let's do it.
But it's hard. It's really hard. None of what I'm saying is true. In fact, I was talking is easy. Well, I was talking to this guy at a speaker bureau the other day, and he said something which has always stayed with me. He said the problem that you have, Caspar, the problem you have is that what most people want from speakers is they want the complex made simple. Right. And I said, yeah, I get that. If you go and see Matthew Syed, he says, there's no such thing as talent. Everything's practice. And you go, oh, that's beautiful. Right. But the problem, he says, what you're doing is you start off by saying that everything's much more complicated than they thought, because this thing called probability is always there and it's messy, and no one when the weatherman says there's a 30% chance of rain tomorrow, what are you supposed to do with that? Like, take 30% of your umbrella? Like, no one knows exactly what that means. So that's the trouble with my material. It's predicated on this idea that you actually have to relinquish these simple answers. There are no simple answers. But if you can get to grips with the messiness, honestly, you can create so much value by embracing this. And let me just say one final thing here. People do this every day. We all do this. You're in sales. Your listeners. I've been in sales. I sold for that video production company. You go to meetings. You pick up the phone. How many times is it successful? If it's 1 in 3, you're doing brilliantly. It's more likely to be 1 in 5, 1 in 10, depending on what you're selling and in what context. Could be 1 in 100, right? In other words, salespeople embrace calculated risks every single day. They don't necessarily think about it like that, but actually, salespeople, more than probably any other profession, part of the business, are right in the center of this idea of not everything's going to succeed, but if and when it does, we get a greater return on investment. So where are we apportioning our time and energies?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard sometimes to get people to pick up that phone, and it's interesting sometimes. I like to say, if you ring 3 times and you make 300 quid, then every time you ring, it's worth £100. Exactly
that. And so, that's exactly right. And I know that some sales teams think of it like that and some don't. But if you can think of it like that, and obviously if you branch it out beyond sales, you have to scale it up. So at the scale of Google are like mining asteroids. That might not work, right? So that's like $3 billion down the drain. Okay. But they're so huge that mining asteroids to them is like, phoning up John and the company down the road and making a sales appointment. That might not work either, right? But their scale is so huge. If you can start to think about it like that all of these activities have a net gain. So self-driving cars, mining asteroids, internet in Africa, all of these things have a value. It might be that one of them succeeds and the others don't, but it doesn't. And it'll look like luck. That's the trouble. When that thing succeeds, particularly if you're in this really high variant space, people go, oh, well, it's really lucky that happened. No, that's how probability works. Some things won't and some things will, because it's all a probability. But if you can regard every sales call as being worth 100 quid, then what you're doing is, and this is the magic, you reward activity and you move away from the short-term results on this occasion. And that's powerful.
It's funny that you just sort of triggered something in my mind. I was thinking there when you said it was luck. It's like that person who was an overnight success, but you forget about the 30 years it's took them to get there.
Exactly. And what they've been doing is making, sorry to make it really dry, but resource allocations, they've been doing these things, and every single comedy night that bombed, every single training session where they fell over, they've all had a value, and then that value gets realized at a certain point. I mean, I was at Cambridge with Rob Webb and David Mitchell, and at the beginning of Facebook, so about 10 years ago, I caught up with David Mitchell again. We went out for a drink, and it was fascinating, as someone who was at university with him when he was a nobody, and even then he was quite famous, now super famous. But the journey that he went on, the writing sessions that he got paid no money for, the Edinburgh shows that no one went to, the writing for Jack Doherty that he got, 300 quid a week for, like the amount of work and time that he put in to becoming David Mitchell that was unpaid and unrewarded, and he was living in a bedsit in Swiss Cottage. People don't see that, but every single one of those units has a value, and then it gets realized at a point of time in the future. It's the same premise. It's just like the sales calls. They all have a value. It's just that value gets realized sporadically.
Yeah, definitely. There's no one got where they are without hard work. It's as simple as that. You've got to put the hard yards in.
Yeah.
Good man. So, CasparBerry.com.
Yes.
Anything else you want to leave us with?
I think that's it, really. I mean, if anyone, fancies this for their organization, it's CasparBerry.com. I'm kind of a one-trick pony, really, but I hope I do that trick quite well. So, drop me a line.
No poker puns in there at all about tricks? No?
No.
Good man. Well,
I play some poker as well, by the way. If anyone wants poker as well, I do that for organizations,
really?
But that's all the same. Yeah, all the same web address. Yeah, about 50% of speeches or training sessions are followed by poker, and that's a really good way of exploring this in a nice, safe environment.
And getting more money out of the company by winning.
I don't play with them. I don't play with them.
You're missing a trick. Okay, good man. Caspar, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed that. And all the best, my friend.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks to Caspar Berry there. So, has that made you think? Is there an element of risk in your business or idea? Is there a project you want to investigate, but your appetite for risk is holding you back? So we touched upon something there that if you don't risk anything, you risk everything. So I'd be interested to hear your opinions on risk. Are risk and reward proportional? So do you agree with the greater risk, the greater return? Let me know through the usual channels, industryangel.com. Make sure you subscribe to get more value bombs dropped into your eardrums next week. Until next time, I'm Ian Farrer. This is the Industry Angel, and thanks for listening.
Ian, you there?
Yeah, he's still there?
Sorry, buddy. Sorry. Do you know what happened? That little diddling went off.
Yeah.
And I muted my computer, but obviously in doing that, I mute you as well. I apologize.